When I went to Grand Canyon University to get my degree in education, that was the place to go if you wanted to do education, because they had this thing called a teacher guarantee. And it was that if they give you a degree in education and you go off and in your first year of teaching, wherever you were, that school was not satisfied with you, they could send you back to be retaught. They guaranteed. And they had like a 98% placement rate. It was, I mean, if you had Grand Canyon on your resume, you got bumped up to the top of the list. So that's what everybody wanted. So I think what was going on there was not, I don't remember anybody ever coming back to be retaught because someone wasn't satisfied. But what you had, because they guaranteed their teachers, you had the sifter. There was this one particular lady, everybody had to take her class, and she was the one who either let you continue or put a stop to it. And if you had her class, even if it was only for one semester, you never forget her name. It was
Dr. Betts Frederick.
Yes. He had her too a few years after me. And I remember as I was going through the education program, there was this emphasis on Jesus is the master teacher. And so there was this focus on modeling after the way he did it. So, of course, there were principles of teaching that they would emphasize, and I'm telling you this for a reason. Hopefully it'll become evident as we go along. One of them was integration, and that was that you can teach more than one thing at a time, that you should be teaching more than one thing at a time. One of them was you needed to know your students. You needed to know where they were coming from, what they already knew, so that you could build on that. And you needed to anticipate any misunderstandings that they might come into your class with. Another was this fancy thing called scope and sequence. And it was, there's an order to the way you teach things. If you're going to teach someone how to write an essay, first they need to know how to write a paragraph, with the topic sentence. If they're going to write a paragraph, first they need to know how to write a complete sentence. And so there's this plan for teaching where you start with the fundamentals and you build from that. So that was something you had to do every time you did a lesson plan. Of course, there are varied methods for teaching. You want to teach to your visual learner, to your auditory learner, to your kinesthetic learner, because everybody learns a different way. There's this thing called transfer, another fancy word for if I teach you a skill given this situation, I should be able to put you in a brand new situation, and you should, if you've mastered the skill, you should be able to apply it in that new situation. And then there was this thing called the teachable moment. And I think you've all probably heard that phrase. And I was introduced to this moment in Betts Frederick's class. This woman, she was scary. There was this one time, we were sitting there and we had to give these little mini lessons, and this girl gave her mini lesson, and when you gave the mini lesson, Betts was sitting there grading you, and she would pick two students to sit on either side of her and grade as well. So you saw what it was like from her side. And I was one of the ones sitting next to her when this girl got up there and did her lesson, and Betts right there in front of the whole class said, "You need to change your major. Go see your advisor. You're not going to be a teacher." So we all had a little bit of fear in there. And then there was a girl who, it was her day to give her mini lesson, and right before class, she locked the keys in her car. She was crying. She comes in there and she's telling everybody what happened. They're all, "Just tell her that you locked the keys in the car. I'm sure she'll understand. You just do it tomorrow." Well, what do you think Betts did? "No, you're going to go ahead." She goes, "What if you were a teacher and you had planned this lesson and you were going to use a projector or a movie or some kind of technology and it wouldn't work? What are you going to do? Just decide not to teach for the day?" "No, you're going to have to learn how to wing it." And that was a teachable moment for all of us, that it doesn't matter what happens, you go ahead and do what you need to do. So I'm hoping that I'll hit on some of those things as we go through here and watch our master teacher teach more than one thing at a time. I wanted to look at a couple we didn't quite finish chapter 13. We got through, what were we doing, parables?
Yeah, we got the
Okay. So after the parables, there we go. When he finished speaking the parables, he passed on from there. He came to his own land and he taught them in their synagogue, and they were astonished, and they said, "From where did he get such wisdom and acts of power? Is he not the craftsman? Is not his mother's name Miriam, and his brothers and his sisters? From where then did he get all these? This is the kid down the street. What's he, how is he doing this?" It was an obstacle to them. And Yeshua said, "The prophet is not despised unless he's in his own land and in his own house." He did not do any acts of power there due to their lack of faith. And I'm sure we've all experienced that, where we've said something to our significant other time and time and time again, and it's not till somebody else says it to them, they're like, "You know what this guy told me?" And you're saying, "I have said that to you before."
It's just confirmation. That's what
Yeah. So I wanted us to notice here, how has their past experience with Yeshua influenced their lack of belief? Well, he's just a kid down the street. So let's compare to the next thing that happens at the beginning of chapter 14. You got this story about Herod. Mm-hmm. Herod, the tetrarch of the province, heard the report about Yeshua, and he said to his young men, "This is John the Baptist who has been awakened from the dead." Hold on a second. He was just in his hometown. And they were like, "He's just the kid down the street." Here we have Herod, who's already thrown around the idea of resurrection. We're not even there yet. He has it wrong. He has it twisted up. But he's ready to believe that someone's been raised from the dead. Just the wrong person. He says that's why such forces are working in him. And then it gives the account where he had captured John, he bound him, he placed him in prison because he had said, "You shouldn't be with your brother's wife." Herod thought to kill him, but he was afraid to. Then on his birthday, the daughter dances. He says, "I'll give you whatever you want." And her mother had put words in her mouth. She requested, saying, "Give me the head of John the Baptist here on a platter." Herod is troubled, but because he gave this oath, and there's other people that saw it, again, he's afraid of what other people think. He has to do it to save face. So you know that Herod didn't want to, but he had to do it anyway. And so I got to think, this is, and now he thinks he's raised from the dead. To come back and get him? I think there's a little telltale heart going on here, where Herod's guilt, or he's worrying over this thing that he knows he shouldn't have done, is influencing his incorrect or twisted belief that John the Baptist has come back from the dead. So I wanted us to consider, in what ways do our previous experiences influence our lack of belief or an incorrect belief. And we find this a lot, and we've noted this before when we talk to people who have a real strong church background or have gone to seminary. They're much harder to discuss these things with than someone who has no church background. And so, and all of us have a church background. So I think we have to be conscious of how what we've assumed to be true or what we've experienced or heard before might kind of color the way we're looking at things. And I think this is a theme that's going to come up later in the chapter. So kind of tuck that in your pocket. Now, wait. Before we go there, we're going to do 2 chapters tonight.
Wow.
I think. We're going to try. Okay. Now, these chapters contain some very familiar stories that we've heard before, more than once, I'm sure. We've got your feedings, the feeding of the 5,000, the feeding of the 4,000. We have the walking on water story. We have, probably not so familiar, but the Pharisees accused the hand-washing issue, okay? Then we also have the story about the woman, the Syrophoenician woman whose daughter has a demon. She comes to him and says, even the dogs or even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from the master's table. We'll look at it more closely, but I'm just trying to refresh your memory about these stories. Now, there's things we can glean from just these stories in and of themselves, all by themselves. And I think we've done this in our church background, that, you've got these feedings, these miracles, and that there's this endless supply of bread, maybe is the takeaway from that. The walking on water, story about faith and doubt and fear. You've got the hand washing, where the Pharisees, again, are accusing the innocent, and they've twisted things up. You've got the crumbs for the dogs story, and that's, we talked about this earlier, and it was about this woman acknowledging what belongs to who. And I think, like the disciples in the story about the bread that we're about to read, we look at these and we see 7 loaves of bread. There's some food here, but like the disciples, we might be missing that there's more food here than we thought. So I want us to look at it with fresh eyes, and like children with no previous experience. We're going to try to get there. Try to pretend like we haven't heard this before and we haven't already understood what it was taught. Oh, I know what that's talking about. No previous experience, no possible misunderstandings. We're gonna try to look at it like kids. Now, when I was teaching art to kids, there's this technique you use to try and help them draw something more accurately. And it involves tricking the brain into forgetting what it thinks it knows. Like when you have a kid draw a face. The brain, actually I think it's the left side, thinks it knows what a face looks like. So if you ask them to draw that face, they're struggling with that kid version of a face where the eyes are round and then the mouth goes like that version of a face that we draw on stick figures is competing with the version sitting in front of them. Okay, what they think they know, competing with what is there in front of them. And the way you trick their brains into forgetting that is you have them draw a picture, but you flip that picture upside down. And you say, now draw it. And that weakens the mind's ability to try and say that's a face. And now it becomes lines that move a certain way, shapes and colors, and it ends up being more accurate because you have sabotaged the brain's urge to think it already knows what's going on. So we're not going to flip it upside down. We're going to turn it inside out, kind of. Okay? We're not going in order, because I don't usually go in order. Sorry. All right, so let's take a look here, and I'll explain why I picked the order I did when we get about halfway through. Okay, the first one, I have handouts. Huzzah! This side with the number 1. It has a number 1 up in the corner.
It's the same banana. Oh, okay.
Okay.
Number 2, number 1.
What you have at the top is the feeding of the 5,000. Just on side 1. We'll get to side 2 a little later. Maybe. Or I might just have you take that home and do it on your own. Side 1, yeah. Okay, side 1. At the top, you've got the feeding of the 5,000. At the bottom, you have the feeding of the 4,000. I want you to take just a few minutes by yourself. I left some space in the middle. And I want you to try and jot down some similarities between those 2 accounts and some differences.
Oops. I don't have pen.
Similarities and differences. June.
Oh, I got one in my pocket.
Both and the
I was going to throw it at you. Let's see what you got. Throw out some. Similarities, different. Should we do similarities first? Okay. Somebody, give me, something that's similar between the 2 stories? Keith.
There was bread and fish as the supplies.
All right. Bread and fish in both stories. Jerry.
The disciples gave the food.
The disciples are the ones that handed out the food. Yeah.
similarity.
He had compassion for the people in both stories. Grace?
Very mundane. He went about the similarities or the differences?
Similarities.
Similarities.
Yeah.
Well, there was a crowd.
Yeah.
Jesus did all healing first. He made them sit down because they're hungry. He had compassion. with them.
They
He
sat down. Mm-hmm.
And so he gave them both bread and fish. Of course, the difference is the count. And the similarity also that he gathered what was left over.
And he picked up the leftovers.
Yeah.
In both. Well, somebody did anyway. Tracy, did you have your hand?
I'm not sure if someone already said that they were in a wilderness, like desolate place.
Well, desolate place. Yeah. Both stories. Yeah.
Hungry.
It was a different.
Yeah.
Desolate and
Yeah,
wilderness,
people
same
hungry.
thing.
Yeah.
Following.
You had hungry people.
Gave thanks to God for the food.
He blessed the bread in both of them, or he didn't bless the bread. Sorry, he gave a blessing. They don't bless the food. The blessing was to God.
Disciples picked up the food afterwards.
Yes, the disciples gathered the leftovers.
People follow him out
And of
to the
course-
wilderness.
The people followed him out to the wilderness.
And he
There
leaves
was
in a
this
boat, and
miraculous-
leaves what goes away right away.
Grace,
Miraculous multiplication of both bread and
yeah,
fish.
miracle both times. How about differences? Grace,
One happened in a boat, the other is mountain. One happened after a days with the people, the other is
By the
3
way,
days.
did one happen, he went up to a mountain, but
And the other one was
he
in a
left
boat.
in a boat to
Yeah.
went to another place.
He went into a boat,
Yeah.
but it didn't happen in the
yeah,
boat.
It didn't
but-
happen in a boat,
No,
but he
but
left.
he went,
Okay,
yes.
yeah,
okay,
yeah.
yeah. The
And then
first
just-
one was after one day, and the second one
3
3
days.
days, and then they got their food.
Yeah, and then one had 5 loaves and 2 fish, the other one 7 loaves and
Some
there was no
fish.
count
Okay.
of fish. And then the leftover was 12 baskets, the other was 7 pots. I
Yes.
didn't even realize this.
Yes, yes.
And the number 5,000 and the other was
4,000.
4,000. With the 5,000, he had fewer things to give.
Yeah.
With the 4,000, he had more things to give, but he gathered more with the fewer and less
Yeah.
with the.
Yeah, Keith, and then Jerry. Keith.
Well, did anybody say they all ate and were satisfied?
Yes. Oh no.
For similarities,
Yeah.
Similarity, yes.
nobody said that.
Okay.
All right, Jerry, and then
I didn't
Grace.
see any healing in the first 5,000, but there was healing in the
There
4,000.
were. There were.
Yeah,
There
said
are-
he
it
felt
happens-
good for them and healed those among them who were weak.
Yes.
Yeah, there's.
There's healing.
Ye-
both.
Yeah, I think. Yeah,
Oh,
Grace.
I may be wrong. In the first one, the disciples told Jesus that the people were hungry.
Yes,
In the second one, Jesus spoke to the disciples and said the people were hungry.
yes. Very good observation. Very good, John.
Second one was 3 days with him, and the first one, he just arrived and they just run up to him.
As the day got late. Yeah, yeah.
I had one. In the first story, they sat down on the grass, and in the second story, they sat down
On
on
the ground. Yes. Very good. Excellent. Any others?
I think they, in the first one, they were telling them to go to town to get food.
Uh-huh.
The second one, they were saying there's nowhere to go.
Right. Right.
Yeah,
there weren't
like
many
in the
towns
first
close
one,
enough.
Yeshua's disciples were saying, send them away to get some food. And then in the second story, Yeshua was like, we need some food for these people. So does it happen?
And it's too far. They'll faint trying to get there. John.
What did I have? Oh, sure. Oh yeah, they were very amazed, of course, that he healed people. Only in John it's actually mentioned for the 5,000. But here it is also mentioned that they are very amazed, and not in the first. For the 5,000, it's not mentioned that they were amazed that he healed so many people.
Interesting.
It's good, though.
Yeah.
And it's the only parable, by the way, that, or the only miracle that's mentioned in all 4 Gospels.
The both feedings or just one in
Five.
particular?
Five.
The 5,000?
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Very nice.
that's what Michael
All right.
Wood has the dividing line for his chronological gospel.
At the feeding of the
Feeding of the
5,000.
5,000, because it's the first time in the Bible it's mentioned in all 4 gospels.
Awesome. Interesting. Very good. Very good. Okay, I listed a few here. I think you guys hit them all. Desolate place. He felt moved for the people. Healings before the meal. In both cases, bread and fish. People commanded to sit. Yeah, you guys got all these. Food to disciples. Then the disciples give the food to the people. All ate were satisfied. Leftover pieces collected. Excellent. And you guys added more. That was great. The differences are the 1 day and the 3 days. Villages nearby, wilderness. In the first one, you guys pointed this out too, that the disciples initiate. They say, these guys are hungry. We need to send them away. And in the second one, he initiates. He says, I don't want to send them away. They're hungry. That was Yeshua saying at that time. The order here is different. In the first one, he feels compassion, then he heals them, then he feeds them. In the second one, he heals them, then he feels compassion for them, and then he feeds them. The grass and the ground, and then the number differences. So what I want you to do for just a second, look, when we consider these differences, there's this theory out there that the 5,000 was Jews and the 4,000 was Gentiles. And can we find support for that in these differences if you take a look at these? You see anything that supports that idea?
I don't know if it supports it, but I've heard the leftover baskets.
Right here?
So like the 7 representing the 70 nations and the 12 equaling the 12 tribes.
Oh, the 2 crafted in, or the 2 lost tribes? Or
The 12 baskets
Oh, the 12
leftover
baskets.
representing the 12 tribes and the 7 representing the 70 nations from Noah.
And your baskets and pots, somebody noticed that those were different words in Greek. This is like a knapsack almost that the Jews traditionally will carry around their stuff in when they travel. And this pots thing, it's like a hamper. It's what Paul, the apostle to the Gentiles, was lowered in outside the walls of Damascus. So two different types of things were put in. Somebody else finds support.
Well, I think that it's possible because in Matthew 15:29 it says that Yeshua passed on from there and came to the Sea of Galilee, and then he went up a mountain. So in the Galilee region, there's definitely more Gentiles than there would be down south near Jerusalem.
And in fact, in Mark 7, when he's feeding the 4,000, that's the second feeding, it says he was in the Decapolis, which is a Gentile area. So we get a little more information from Mark. The idea of the Jews sitting on grass, the Gentiles on the ground, the Jews in a field with existing growth, and that the Gentiles were new ground ready to be planted, when you think of this kind of bigger idea. The 12 tribes of Israel and the 7 nations. If you look in Deuteronomy, it says, when Adonai your God shall bring you into the land, you clear away the nations before you. And it lists all the Hites, the Hittites, the Jebusites. And it lists 7. It says the 7 nations greater and stronger than you. The idea of first to the Jews, then to the Gentiles. And then in Matthew, where he's, and hold on, because there's a thing about the 5,005, that being the books of the Torah. I don't know. And the 4,000 being the 4 cardinal directions, the rest of the world. Some things I saw, there's a lot, that idea is pretty prevalent out there, that's what was going on here. In Matthew, when he says, these 12 Yeshua sent, he says, don't go in the way of the Gentiles. And then in Luke, he says the master appointed 70 to every city and every place where he himself is going to come. And I don't know exactly what's going on there. If anything, it might be a foreshadow of going to those 70 nations on the table of nations. So I think it's probably pretty safe to play with that idea that we have Jews and Gentiles. And we might find more support for that as we look further into this whole series of stories. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to compare, and actually, this is on the other side of your paper, but I don't know if we'll take the time to do it. I think we'll just read both stories, and then I'll point out some parallels between these two. So as I read these to you, just look for parallels and kind of, if you see one, kind of keep it in mind. It says, this is a walking on the water story. Then Yeshua urged his disciples to go down into a boat to cross ahead of him to the other side of the sea until he had sent away the people. He sent the people away and went up the mountain alone to pray. It was evening and he was there alone. Now the boat had come halfway across the sea and the waves were tearing it apart, for there was a wind against it. During the 4th watch, Yeshua came to them, walking on the surface of the water. Okay, just for a second, in your mind, visualize disciples in a boat and they're trying to row against the wind. I want to ask you a question. In your picture in your mind, how old are these disciples? In your picture,
How what?
how old are these guys in the boat they're trying to row?
I'm used to old, but
I know. My guys at first had, gray beards, long robes, serious fishermen. Okay, I want you to think with this story, let's have some fun with it. You've all seen Goonies?
yeah. Sorry.
Okay, Goonies, the movie. Okay, this is a group of young boys on the adventure of a lifetime. Okay, Yeshua is standing up on the mountain watching them try to row against the waves. Can you imagine? He had to be smiling because they're just being teenage boys. His disciples see him walking on the surface of the sea and were terrified. They said, "It's the appearance of a spirit," and they cried out in fright. Yeshua quickly called to them, "Be strong, for it is I, do not fear." And then Peter answered and said to him, "If it is you, Master, please command, and I will come to you on the water." He said, "Come." And Peter went out from the boat and walked on the surface of the water to come to Yeshua. When he saw the wind was strong, he became afraid and he began to sink. He cried out and he said, "Master, save me." Yeshua quickly reached out his hand, took hold of him, and said to him, "Small one in faith, why is your heart divided?" They went up into the boat. The wind subsided. Then the men in the boat approached and bowed down to him and said, "Surely you are the Son of God." Okay, so there's our familiar story that we've heard so many times since we were little. Okay, we're going to compare it with this story. Look for parallels. Yeshua went out from there and departed. This is not in order. I'm skipping. Yeshua went out from there and departed to the areas of Sidon and I don't know. Somewhere else. A Syro-Phoenician Canaanite woman was coming out from those regions, and she cried out to him, saying, "Be gracious, my master, son of David, because my daughter is terribly afflicted by a demon." But Yeshua did not answer her with a single word. His disciples approached him and requested of him, saying, "Send her away, because she is crying out after us." He answered and said, "I was sent only to the lost sheep who are of the house of Israel." But she came and bowed down to him and said, "My master, help me." He answered and said, "It is not good to take the children's bread and cast it before little dogs." She said, "Yes, my master. However, even the little dogs eat crumbs that fall from their master's table." Yeshua answered and said to her, "Woman, great is your faith. Let it be for you according to your desire." And her daughter was healed. Okay, let's compare these two stories. Parallels. Did you guys pick up on anything just right off the bat? Stood out, Jerry?
Yeah, he said he came to the 10 tribes of the house of Israel, and she's a Gentile.
Makes you wonder, doesn't it? Because then he turns around and he does what she wants.
Because she had faith to believe.
Do you think maybe the disciples are starting to question their understanding of the lost sheep?
Seems like he did more for those Gentiles than he did for his own people.
Okay. Any other parallels
Did somebody, I'm tired, sorry, did someone say crumbs, eating the leftover crumbs, comparing to the baskets full?
Well, we're comparing the walking on water story to the crumbs from the table story. We'll get to the crumbs and those crumbs later.
Both asked for help.
Those both say, "Master,
Both
help
asked
me." Mm-hmm. Jerry.
This is a difference. Peter had little faith. This woman had
Great faith. Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay.
Let's see.
First of all, in the first story, you have a wind tearing at the boat, and they think that there's a ghost out there walking on the water. Okay, so there's a thing with spirit and being remember when we talked about the boat as being your vessel, your body, you? Okay, and now we have a girl who's being terribly afflicted by a demon or spirit. Okay. In the first story, Yeshua quickly calls out. It doesn't just say he calls out, it says he quickly calls out. In the second story, it says he didn't say a single word. Okay? In the first story, the disciples, Peter, says, "Command me, I will come to you." In the second story, the disciples say, "Send her away." In the first story, Yeshua says, "Come." In the second story, he says, "I was sent only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel." In the first story, Peter sinks and he cries out, "Master, save me." In the second story, the woman bows and she says, "Master, help me." Okay. In the first story, he says to Peter, "Small one of faith." In the second story, he says, "Woman, great is your faith." Okay. I think these two stories, we've got a side by side of small faith and great faith. And can we learn something about faith by comparing those? I mean, I know we already know faith and all that, right? We know. Is there something else that we can know about faith?
Well, I would say that, Peter, he had faith enough to say, if that's really you, let me, come out on the water and walk with you on the water. But then he got distracted. He became afraid of what was going on around him, where the woman was incredibly single-minded and was on a mission and was not going to be distracted by anything. In fact, you couldn't beat her down with a stick and tell her to go away. She's coming on like a tenacious dog. She ain't going anywhere. But Peter wavers when he sees something outside of, focusing on Yeshua.
There's this saying that we looked at a while back, "I desire kindness, not sacrifice." And we wanted to think about that as I desire steadfast loyalty, not outward gestures. Do you see that here at all?
Well, the woman is steadfast in her belief. Peter is not.
Jerry?
I would say under the law of righteousness and justice, when somebody calls out to God for justice or for, he has to answer. He's the king, and if he's the king, he has to answer.
So do you think she knew he couldn't say no?
She called out to him. It doesn't say whether a believer calls out to him. It says when somebody calls out to him.
That's good to know.
I think like the woman, I think that she also, at where she was from, they worshiped like a lot of pagan gods and had, that as well. When you think about it, I imagine how many people also she went and told, and how she then turned and maybe worshipped him, as well. And a lot of times then, they would give their child is either, I think the reason why probably the girl was possessed by a demon could be too because of the rituals and the different things that they did and bound before idols and all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that, in turn, when she, when he did that for her too, she had faith that he could heal the girl. So I think that also it goes even further to even that deeper.
Tracy?
The same word when he says that he gave to her, it is as you desire, it says, when he heals her daughter.
Yeah.
That same word is used in John 15 when Messiah says, if you abide in me and in my word, and my words abide in you, you shall ask what you desire, and it shall be done for you. So I'm just seeing a connection there with these crumbs of bread and this word, that she just has this faith in this word of, and like abiding in him of some sort, and that what she's asking for, he grants.
And did you notice, even though she was from that region where they had all those other gods, that she still identifies him as the son of David when she addresses him?
Also, by the way, Peter just was a selfish person because I think he just wanted to see if he could walk on the water as well.
Well, Peter's the oldest of the group, so he's got all those little cronies here. Let me show you what I can do. I think there was a little bit of showing off going there, and it wasn't this grand outward act. But what happens when we get ourselves on a high horse?
We
Oh,
fall.
we sink.
We get our legs knocked out from underneath us. And I think this becomes one of Peter's more embarrassing moments. But he has many. But I imagine this is one of them right there in front of all of his friends.
I'm sure too, like I think John says the boat was out 3 or 4 miles. Like how far did he walked out on the sea?
I don't know.
Quite a distance. That would be a shocker. No wonder they were afraid.
Do you think
Yeah.
it was in the spirit? Because, you know, when they first talk about like the spirit, and I always envisioned, you know, when you were talking earlier from what do you envision about people, how old they are, but almost that he is in his spiritual Christ form and not in his physical form right away.
Oh.
It means they would take hold of him, right?
Yeah.
Physically pull him up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't see a
always
problem with it
wondered,
being
however,
him.
the resurrected body was also different, but also be able to touch, to eat, and
Yeah.
you know,
And walk through the door.
walk through the
With
door.
it locked.
Right.
He even calls it, because even after he's resurrected, he said, he calls it flesh.
Yeah,
So that's puzzled me too.
yeah.
I know. I wonder
It is possible.
if he still has the holes in his hands. Does that mean we still have our scars? I don't know. That's just a point.
Maybe they have a plastic surgery like that.
Yeah.
Another difference in this
Jerry.
thing,
Jerry.
another difference is Peter was talking directly to Yeshua. The mother was going, praying for her daughter. It wasn't the daughter that was seeking to get unpossessed by a demon. It was the mother
Yeah.
doing it on her behalf.
Peter said, "Let me
Peter-
walk
Peter
on
made
water,"
intercession
and
for
she
her.
wasn't even asking for herself. She's asking for somebody else. So was the centurion. He was not, and he's the other Gentile. He wasn't asking for himself. He was. So we have this whole idea of loving another being demonstrated by these Gentiles, which makes you okay. Never mind. There's this question mark that I had. This story again is told in Mark. I don't know why. For some reason, in Mark, they leave out the walking on the water part. But then he says, when they get back in the boat, it says, their hearts were astonished, even more, they were amazed, for they still not comprehend the matter of the loaves of bread because of their hardness of heart. What?
Well,
Why is that there?
I agree.
Okay.
A lot of scholars think that Mark was an amanuensis who was writing the book for Peter, and that this is actually Peter's gospel. That's a very common scholarly idea. That
So
this
Peter
is-
didn't want that.
Peter did left out the story.
So this is some Photoshop for Peter. Okay.
So we'll just leave that.
But when I saw that there about the bread, you know, what happened right before this, in case you've lost track of which order we're going into, was the feeding of the 5,000, the first feeding. And then we have the walking on the water. And then he says they didn't comprehend the matters of loaves of bread because of their hardness of heart at the end of the walking on the water story. And it makes me think, well, then I don't understand the matters of the loaves of bread because I don't understand why he said that there. Does anybody think know why that's there?
I mean,
Mark, what? Mark 16?
Mark is more the person that
That's 6.
is the representation of the body, right? The earthly.
I don't know.
What was again? And John is
Okay.
of course the spiritual.
Yes,
And then
yes.
what was Matthew?
King, I think?
Because they all had 4 different
Yeah.
things. If we understand all 4 correctly, then they'll all say something different. At least
Yes.
That's what I read.
Yes. I don't know. I just wondered why that was there. Let's maybe write that down for something to look up and then tell me next time
Mark is the servant.
if you. Mark is the servant.
Mark is Yeshua as the
Servant.
servant.
Okay.
Okay, so technically now this makes, because before we talked about our 2 feedings, we talked about the woman with the crumbs from the table, we had the walking on water, which involved no bread until we looked at Mark, and now it does involve bread. So technically, all 4 stories we've looked at so far involve some bread. Okay, let's take a little, I want to talk about chiasms. Not chasms, but chiasms. Okay, it's a literary device used by the Hebrews a lot. Okay, it's where I'll explain it in a second. Let's take a look at this passage right here before I show you what a chiasm is. Some of you are already familiar with this. That's okay. No one can serve 2 masters, and we've jumped on a side trail here Okay, just for a second. No one can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and wealth. What's the main takeaway from this passage, would you say? Keith?
You can only serve God.
You can only serve God.
Yeah. That's a love of money and stuff.
Yeah, you got to choose between him and money. Okay. Let's arrange this as a chiasm for just a second. A chiasm is where you've got parts A, B, C, and then you work yourself back out C, B, A. These are menorahs, these menorah patterns that we see. Okay, look at parts A and A. No one can serve two masters. You cannot serve God and wealth. You see how those are parallels?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let's look at B and B. He will hate the one, this B, despise the other. Hate, despise. Okay, your middle two, love and love the other, devoted to one. So love and devotion's in the middle. And when they use chiasms in Scripture, it's because unlike our Gentile minds who think the main idea is at the beginning or the end, a lot of times what they're going to do is they're going to put the emphasis in the center. And so our takeaway from this, while yes, it is that no one can serve two masters, that we need to serve one master, God, not wealth. What is our fuel for doing that? What drives us in that service? It's the love and the devotion. We don't want to put the cart before the horse there. You can serve, but all you're doing is outward acts.
Yep.
It's love and devotion, then serve. Okay, let's take a look at one other. He says, come to me, all of you who are we just hit this. It sounded familiar. All of you who labor and are heavy laden, I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart. You will find rest for your souls, for my yoke is easy and my burden is light. Arranged as a chiasm. This one's a little bit different. It's A-B, center, B-A. Come to me, all of you who labor and heavy laden. Burden is light. Heavy, light. I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you. Let's look at the other B. You will find rest. My yoke is easy. In the center, how do we do this? How do we take his yoke upon us and make our burden light? Learn from me.
Right.
Okay? So you can see how, yes, there is a takeaway from just reading it top to bottom. But if you notice this pattern where he repeats something, try to make your way to the middle for maybe that other thing that he was teaching. Tracy?
I just want to point out something cool that just kind of hit me about how the main idea, the most important things in the middle of these chiasms, and that is where Messiah sits. In the menorah, he's in the middle. In the seven churches and the seven lampstands, he's in the midst of them.
Mm-hmm.
Or two or three gathered and together my name, there I am in the midst of them. So all of these little chiasms
Yes.
point to Messiah.
And that menorah was designed after the heavenly pattern that he saw. That's
Yeah, and if you study the menorah and you figure out about that center shamash candle in the center, all of the other candles are lit from the center one. And the shamash center branch is called the servant. So this is the
servant.
servant, yeah. So the center branch of the menorah is called the servant branch.
that's
It
what
represents
shamash
Messiah.
means.
And I think that's a good way to look at it. Like, these chiasms are basically a menorah pattern in
Right.
Scripture.
A little digression. You mentioned menorah, candles. The Jews don't use candles for Greek inventions, Egyptian inventions. They use lampstands. I mean, actually, the menorah is a lampstand. So at the end of it are lamps, not candles.
Yeah.
And James is always in the middle, the chiasm.
Is it what?
The punchline is always placed in the middle.
If you can find the middle, okay, so
Punchline.
yeah,
Cute.
yeah. Now, when I'm reading chapters 14 and 15, I'm seeing 14 starts with the feeding of the 5,000, and I'm seeing 15 ends with the feeding of the 4,000, and I'm chiasm. So I start making my way in, okay? Here we've got the feeding of the 5,000, feeding the 4,000. So I'm looking, that's why I compared walking on water, which is followed by healings, to crumbs from the table, which is also followed by healings. And I'm wondering, okay, where's the middle of this thing? And I'm not sure I found it or not. You can take a closer look at it later. We are going to explore in that far, I'm hoping. It's a little off. I think we can do it. Okay, then if you come in from the walking on water, the next thing that happens is hand washing issue. And then he talks about what enters the mouth and what comes out of the mouth. If you look on the other side of that, don't look there yet. Don't jump ahead. He first talks about what enters, comes out of the mouth, and then ends with hand washing. So to me, I think there's a chiasm there. Not sure about the middle punchline, but let's just explore it and see. So that's why I picked those two things to compare. Let's go to that next thing where we get to the hand washing. And this is a little bit difficult. This is going to take, I'm going to do a little Hebrew lesson in here. Y'all good? Keep going?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, all right. We need small chunks. Let's just take the first little chunk right here. Then the scholars and the Pharisees from Jerusalem, a special envoy from Jerusalem, not just any old Pharisees. They came to Yeshua. They said, "Why do your disciples transgress the tradition of the elders, for they do not ritually wash their hands before the meal?" Okay. They didn't say it was a command. It was a tradition of the elders that's since been elevated to the level of a command. There's a little bit of, in Mark 7:3-4, even though Mark's a short book, he says a little more about this particular approach by the Pharisees. He says, "For the Pharisees and the Jews do not eat until they have done ritual hand washing up to the wrist in holding to what the elders handed down. And they do not eat what comes from the market without immersing. And there are other things they have received to observe, such as immersing cups, pitchers, kettles, and beds." They dunk their beds. Okay, and I'm reading this and I start laughing because the story that just came before this is what I'm seeing in my head. You don't get the joke, do you?
No.
Yeah, he took a bath.
He's getting dunked. He's got him by the wrist. He's got him by the wrist. He's ritually clean you, Peter.
I get it now. I'm sorry, it took me a minute. Because this part's out. When he's got him. Or the wrist down. That's funny.
I think it's almost backwards because he's supposed to wash his hands up to the wrist, and it looks like he's getting put in. So this is another thing. I'm like, things are getting flipped on their head right now. He is changing things around. This whole paradigm for these poor disciples is getting flipped, and he's trying to prep them. He knows they have misunderstandings about this stuff, and he's trying to prep them for it. Okay, so then he says, "For God commanded," he switches. They came to him, they said, they don't wash their hands, and he goes, "For God commanded, saying, honor your father and mother. He who curses," wait, hold on a second. I feel like we just took a turn at high speed. Why does he go to honor your father and mother when they were just talking about washing your hands? It seems like he's kind of changed the subject a little bit. Let's look close at the Hebrew for these Old Testament verses he's quoting. And I think we might be able to see what's going on and work our way to the middle of that chiasm.
I think we need a little bit more context about how that right hand turn happened so quickly.
What do you mean?
I mean, they accuse him, why do you transgress the traditions of the elders?
Tradition of men.
And then he says, why do you violate the commands of God? So he makes a big difference here, saying, the traditions of the elders are great. It's a fine tradition to wash your hands.
Yeah.
But in fact, it's healthy. It's a good thing to wash your hands, and that's a tradition of the elders. But why do you violate the commands of God? And then he gives them this example of something to do with honoring your father and mother and something being Corbin, yeah, that can be
Okay.
a bit confusing.
So this is an example then of how they are flipping it around and doing it backwards.
Right.
Okay. So he says, honor your father and mother. And the honor, he's taken this from Exodus 20:12. And the Hebrew for that is kabed, your father and mother, that your days may be prolonged. And that word means to glorify, to honor, to give weight. That whole thing about gravitas. Give weight. Give them, it's like a way of respect.
Credit.
Yes.
Well, I think that's, that is a really, that same word kabed is the root word of kabod, which is God's glory, which means the weight of God's presence. And I think that literally the meaning here is you are to, whatever comes out of your mom and dad's mouth should be given great weight. Listen to your father and mother. So honoring your father and mother may not encapsulate the whole command that's being given here. It's like, listen very carefully and take serious consideration to what your parents say.
And the other thing too, when it's honor, and he mentions about the gift to the temple, he will give. Honoring is also when they're old, you take care of them.
Sure.
That's part of honoring.
Mm-hmm.
And this one, the guy will refuse because
Yeah,
it says it's
we
an
will
example.
get to that
Yeah, to
last.
take care
I'm going
of
to take it one sentence at a time right now,
Oh, wait
Tracy.
till you
Okay.
I just want to say something about that.
Okay. Then he goes to, he who curses his father and mother shall surely die. And let's look at that. He's taken this from Exodus 21:17. He who curses, kalal, there are two words for curse. There's kalal, it means to treat lightly. Okay, opposite of give weight. To treat lightly. And there's arur. You know, we curse and we think, you know, apple, wicked witch type of stuff goes with that, with our previous experience and curse, that word curse. But this word for he who curses his father and mother means to treat lightly. Okay? Now, he does use both these words. Doesn't that kind of freaked me out a little bit?
Yeah, that's serious.
Because, I mean, I've never cursed my mother and father, but I've done that.
Are you sure that's a correct translation?
Would
Maybe
that
it's
mean
not.
more like shame his mother?
Well,
and
you can
father?
look it up and tell me if I'm
No,
wrong.
I mean the kalal might be cursed, but I mean the English translation. I mean we shouldn't have been used word.
Here,
That's the Hebrew.
yeah, here in Genesis and Deuteronomy, you have two verses where both those words for curse are used. Translated as curse, and curse in English. Okay, he has, I will bless those who bless you, and the one who curses, kalals you, takes you lightly, I will curse, arur. So here, I thought this was kind of eye for an eye. You know, if they bless you, I'll bless them. If they curse you, I will curse them. But there's a little more to this. This is almost saying, if they so much as look at you sideways, I will rip their face off.
Yeah.
The difference between the curses.
I see.
Okay, so then in Deuteronomy, he says, cursed is the one who dishonors or makes light of his father. So cursed, bad curse, is the one who takes lightly his father or mother. Okay, and that's we're gonna finish off the last sentence of this, and then we'll come back to that Deuteronomy curse thing. Now, he says, if you say, but you say, and this is them and their traditions of men, if one says to his father and mother, Korban is anything you would receive as my beneficiary, then he is not obligated to honor his father and mother. And this Korban thing, it means like
Separate
gift.
for the Lord.
Yeah, like this is for the Lord. This is a gift to God, and so you can't have it.
Well, let's say that you were got a bonus from work and you're saving up your money and you're going to make a trip to Jerusalem for a pilgrimage festival. And your dad and mom get kicked off of their land and have no place to stay. And you're like, I'd really love to help you, but this money I've been saving is for the Lord. I'm going to serve the Lord with this money. I can't help you because I have vowed that this money that I have saved is for my pilgrimage to Jerusalem.
So you're taking their needs lightly.
Yeah.
I think that's enough to qualify for that version of curse. Tracy, did you have something?
Yeah, I think I just wanted to kind of tie in why he's talking about this too, the honoring the father and mother as opposed to tradition. Is in the Proverbs it talks about, my son, keep the commands of the father and the Torah of your mother. So I think to me there's a connection there with the heavenly father and mother, and that's what they're transgressing.
Yeah, certainly. Okay, this echoed to me of that. If you come with sacrifice and you have an issue with your brother, leave your sacrifice at the altar. Go take care of that issue. That whole idea that our relationships with our brothers, our mothers, our fathers, those are more important to him than those sacrifices that we have for him. That's what kind of God we have. That he puts our relationships with others in front of what we might have to offer him. He wants us to take care of that. The last little piece of this is, he quotes from Isaiah. He says, "This people approaches me with their mouth. With their lips they honor me, but their heart is distant. Their fear of me is empty. It's taught as a commandment of men." He called out to the people and he said, "Listen and understand. It's not what enters the mouth that contaminates a person. What comes out of the mouth, that's what contaminates a person. It's not the external, it's the internal." Okay, this is what we just looked at. Now we're going to hop over here and we're going to look at the second time he addresses all this. Because he only says one little thing in between that we'll look at. He says, explain to us this parable. He says, "Do even you still not have insight? Do you not yet know that everything that enters the mouth goes down in the stomach and is poured out from there into the latrines? But what comes out from the mouth comes out from the heart, and this is what contaminates the person. For out of the heart comes thoughts of evil, murders, adultery, sexual immorality, thefts, false testimony, reviling. These are the things that contaminate a person. But eating without ritual hand washing does not contaminate the person." Out of the storehouses, the heart, the stuff comes out. And this to me smacks of spiritual or physical versus spiritual. You got physical, mouth, stomach, into the toilet. And then you got spiritual, what's in the heart. So, you'll hear this discussed sometimes, this hand washing issue, as is this holy versus common. And I don't put holy versus unholy, because unholy has this connotation for us where you start seeing glowing red eyes and goat horns, and that's not the opposite of holy. Holy is set apart. The opposite of holy is common for everyday use. Okay? Or is this an issue of what's clean and what's unclean? Okay? And they are having issues identifying these things properly, even though it's in there. The traditions are kind of getting in the way. And I'm thinking, maybe there's this another level to this, where he's been telling us all along in Matthew, this is an internal versus an external issue. So if we look at this as a physical versus a spiritual issue, first he's feeding his physical children, the Jews. We're back to our 2 chapters listed in chiasm form. He feeds his physical children. You've got this outward act. Look at me walking on the water. The healings, they touch his garment, the outer. Okay? The hand washing, it's external, internal. And then we flip around, now we got physical, spiritual. You've got this woman demonstrating great faith, love for another. And then he's feeding his spiritual children, Gentiles. So maybe what he's doing is he's trying to, he knows how these disciples, the culture they've been raised in, and he's about to expand this program to include the Gentiles, is he not? That's a huge issue. What happened to Paul? Paul was up there saying all sorts of stuff, and why'd they almost stone him? What did he say?
Salvation has come to the Gentiles.
Oh. Okay, so he needs to kind of fix that misunderstanding, that thing that the disciples, based on where they grew up and what everyone around them is saying, he needs to fix that, because he's about to blow this thing wide open. His disciples come up to him. Now we're looking at the middle. Okay, we're going to go into the middle, the D, the thing that's been missing in the middle of all this. His disciples approach him and they said, do you not know that the Pharisees heard this word and they stumbled because of it? And he said, every plant that my Father who is in heaven did not plant will surely be uprooted. Leave them alone. Let's look at this first. They are blind guides for the blind. If one who is blind leads another who is blind, both will fall into the pit. Okay. He just talked about the cursing of the mother and father. The disciples say they don't understand the stumbling. Now he talks about the blinds. We got mother, father cursed, blind. You remember that? Just for a second. Okay. In Deuteronomy 27:16 right here, this is the part where they're standing on the two mountains. You've got them standing on Ebal, Gerizim, okay, the blessings and the curses. So they're standing on the mountain and they say, cursed is he who dishonors or makes his father or mother, and all the people shall say amen. Okay? There's a whole list of curses there. Do you know what a remez is?
A hint?
A remez is a hint. It's used by Yeshua a lot, where he'll quote something but leave something out as a hint, what he was implying. He does that a lot, especially to these poor Pharisees. He does a lot of really underhanded elbows to them just by leaving out a section. There's one here. In Deuteronomy 27:16, he says, cursed is he who dishonors his father and mother. In Deuteronomy 27:18, he says, cursed is he who misleads a blind person on the road. Okay, and anyone who's familiar with that list of curses is saying, he skipped one. What did he skip? Cursed is he who moves his neighbor's boundary mark. Well, what does that have to do with anything? Well,
you leave your neighbors alone.
what are the Pharisees stumbling over?
The tradition. They moved the boundary from.
Yeah. They've been moving that boundary mark of what is unclean, what is not unclean. This thing about the commandments. They've been moving that. They're not stumbling. Yeshua didn't place a stumbling block in front of them. All he did was move one back where it should have been, and now they're tripping over it because they hadn't had it in the proper place. And it's about what is unacceptable and acceptable.
I think too, it kind of shows that he wasn't accepting that as the ultimate authority, and that's what they wanted, right?
What, the traditions?
Yeah, that they wanted.
Yeah.
They wanted to be able to say what was.
Yeah.
What was right and what was wrong. He
Yeah.
wasn't accepting their authority on that issue.
No, because the lines had already been laid down in Torah.
And I think the next verse in Mark, when you were reading from Mark, was that it said, making the word of God of no effect by your traditions, which you have delivered.
Which you have delivered. Yeah, I think that's really critical because they're tripping over the fact that, these guys aren't making up rules. And in those rules, traditions have been in place for a long time. And at this point in history, they are still referring to them as the tradition of the elders.
Mm-hmm.
Today, ritual hand washing is a command that has been even elevated to the next step. In those days, it was just a tradition of the elder. But these guys are not really trying to make up rules. They're trying to enforce rules that had been made up a long time ago. And they have inherited these traditions themselves. And I think the key takeaway there is inheriting traditions is a great thing, but you got to be careful about what you inherit, because the prophet says we've inherited a lot of lies.
Or the emphasis you place on them, because some of them are great, but when you start saying it's a command, then you
Well, I think
change
also
something.
They never understood the whole Torah. They never understood one of the rules, and he now finally explains what they really mean. That are spiritual rules.
Grace?
But wasn't he also pointing out that you're so concerned about traditions of men that are broken, but you don't even have a heart of what God said. And you break them, like, without even thinking. So he was already comparing their zeal for human traditions against what God is teaching them.
Yeah.
Rules, inward rules.
That they don't care about. They didn't.
I think it's fair to say they're missing the heart of the matter.
Oh, yeah.
Too.
I mean, it just goes right to the heart of it. I mean, honoring your father and mother is it's one of the 10, it's a huge
Right.
one. And they're talking about hand washing.
Right.
I mean, couldn't they come up with something else? I mean, you didn't. Surely they could have tried to come up with something else. But frankly, I don't think he gave them much to go on. I mean, that's a really good testimony right there.
But it was easier for them to follow traditions of their own self and men rather than follow God, because you have to really be.
Yeah, I think it's a testimony about Yeshua, so that, Paul says, keep your behavior pure among the Gentiles, so that in the day of visitation there will be no foul talk about you, no recriminations of you. What the best they can come up with is, how come you're transgressing the commandments of the elders? Wash your hands.
Well, that was pretty obvious. You got 5,000 people out there in some wilderness or desolate area.
They didn't wash their hands.
And they didn't have the resources to wash their hands, and it was pretty obvious they weren't washing their hands.
So yeah, according to the Pharisees,
Right,
they should have
because you
gone,
can't, to eat bread, you have to
But
wash
if they
your
really
hands.
felt that way, let them go hungry. It's not for everybody
Yes,
else.
and they were eating bread.
I think that is an excellent way that he is pointing out the heart of the matter again. You're so concerned about washing your hands that you would have sent away all these people starving to death because they couldn't wash their hands before they ate.
Yeah.
See, yeah, that's cool.
Did you happen to find
He
any
didn't want Yeshua to heal anybody else in heaven.
parallels? This section here, he talks about the father and mother piece right before this line. It says the Pharisees are offended in him. And at the end of chapter 13, it's talking about the Messiah's father and mother. Isn't this the son of Joseph and Mary?
Oh,
And that
yeah.
they were offended in him
Yeah.
at the end of chapter 13. Is there any sort of
I don't know. So what we kind of skipped over when we went to the blind guides to see what was going on in between the mother and the father and the blind tripping was this: every plant, and this, as far as I can tell, is either in the middle or near the middle of this. Every plant my Father who is in heaven did not plant will surely be uprooted. Leave them alone. Does that sound familiar?
Tares.
Wheat and the tares. Yeah. And who does the uprooting?
God, yeah, with the angels.
Not,
Messengers.
not us.
Not us, yeah. That's good.
Okay. So I wanted to look at this again. There's this other thing that I saw as I'm looking at this, is that there's this approaching, sending away, come, go away. There's a lot of this action in this series of stories. So I printed it all out and I highlighted every send got a green and every away got a. And I was near the middle where they approach him, or these people approach me with their lips. It was almost like I think there might be something in the action that's occurring here. And you've got, who is it that does the uprooting or the sending away? The disciples tried. They said, send away the people to go get bread. He said, no. You feed them.
Yeah.
And after he fed them, what did he do? He sent the disciples away, and then he sent the people away. That's his job, to send them away after he's fed them. When the woman comes to him, the disciples again send her away. And then, I sent only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. And I have to just stop there and think, what must they have thought when he went ahead and gave her what she desired?
Good man.
Do we understand who the lost sheep of the house of Israel are? I think is what I'm starting to ask myself. His sheep are the ones who hear his voice. Do they have to be of Hebrew descent?
I hope not, because I'm not.
Are we his spiritual lost sheep?
Yes.
Okay. And then this last one, it's interesting. You've got, I feel like he's in the process of correcting the disciples' misunderstanding about Gentiles, about clean and unclean, because I think that there might have been a general idea that Gentiles were dirty, were unclean. You didn't eat with them.
No, they wouldn't.
I don't think they had a real good view of them. I think if we were to look at your holy, common, they would go common for Gentiles. Clean, unclean, unclean Gentiles. And I think he's trying to fix that because of where this program, he's got program expansion on the brain. And he needs them to be able to accept that idea. In this last one, he says, I don't want to send them away hungry. So that finally the disciples have got the middle message of leave them alone. So the disciples are probably looking at this crowd of 4,000 thinking tares, but they heard him say leave them alone. So the disciples, they are leaving them alone. They don't say send them away, but they also have no concern about how hungry they are after 3 days. Okay, they were concerned about the first group after 1 day getting food. They say nothing here. Finally, Yeshua brings it up. He says, I don't want to send them away hungry. It's like, come on, guys. See what we're doing here? First to the Jews, then to the Gentiles. So then he feeds them and he sends them away. And then if you look through here, bread seems to be prevalent. And I think Tracy brought this up before. You've got bread going to the Jews. That's the children's bread. And then the crumbs. I think here your little dogs are getting their crumbs. And that's an affectionate term. Because I'm one of those little dogs. The cute little dogs. So, the takeaways, the things I wanted us to consider, because I know that flipping things around and making little patterns and that's all entertaining and whatnot, but really the takeaway, I'm hoping, is that we read familiar stories and passages with fresh eyes and we don't let our past experience color our perception of belief and don't think, I understand that, I already know that.
So what would be an example of that? Can anybody think of an example of that? How your preconceived ideas might color your beliefs, letting past experience color your perception?
Comment. When I mentioned about clean and unclean food to my family, they'll say, "Oh, Jesus said everything you come in your mouth is food. It's clean." But so they forget that when Jesus was talking to were Jews, and to them, alligators and monkeys is not food, including pigs. But they don't have that. So that's what I think they say. She said that what we had in mind, the definition of food was different. So it colored their understanding of what Jesus was saying. That anything you put in your mouth that's not what makes you unclean. So they thought all food is clean.
So I know for myself, I'm still battling all the time my own preconceived ideas that I inherited from church, from my parents, from other people that I still to this day love and respect, that I thought were great Bible teachers. Today I have to just question everything that somebody says, and I think that in the book of Acts you'll see that with Paul and the Bereans, It says he told them all these things about Yeshua and they said, wow, that's really neat. Let us go check this out.
Right.
They went to their scriptures to see if what Paul said was true. So they were excited, it seems like. That's what happened to me when I first heard Michael Rood talking about the feasts of the Lord and how, the rapture was something completely different than I thought it was. I had some serious preconceived ideas. And what he said in the video kind of got me a little agitated. I don't know whether for good or for bad, but it just sent me right to my Bible to search to see if what this guy is saying is true. Just like the Bereans did. I'm not saying that I'm a Berean, but you know what? When I heard the words of God speaking through the mouth of Michael Rood in that instance, I searched the scriptures to see if what he was saying was true, and I found that it was true. But it totally went against my preconceived notions, just about every single one of them.
But that way, when you check, you don't allow yourself to be deceived, even though before you were, because you didn't come into the truth that much.
Right.
And the other thing too is because one time he was proven true, and then you become lax and you believe everything he says without checking
Yes,
anymore.
that's
the
the
other
other-
thing
that's
too.
the other
That's a
stuff
guy
in
in
the
a
book.
preconceived idea that this guy taught me right, he could
Yes.
not be wrong anymore.
That's
So
definitely-
another preconceived idea that
That's-
has to be checked.
And
Yeah.
that is,
Yeah.
that has happened with every one of the Hebrew roots teachers that I have seen. I have learned so much from each of them, but then I've heard them say something that I'm like, I don't see support for that in the scripture. Or you're
Right.
pulling that out of the Talmud, or I don't know where you're getting that. But that's just things to keep in mind. Is wherever you're learning from, or whatever somebody's saying, check it out. Is it in the Word of God or not? And does it go against your preconceived idea? So yeah, things to consider. Keep your eyes fresh and be skeptical. Definitely.
And don't believe you're a Gentile because everybody tells you you're one. And don't believe all Israel are Jews because they said that's what it is,
That is a big one.
It's a big one.
Yes.
Because and even after I started studying, it said something about being a Gentile. My dad said, why don't you look up that word? And look up that word. I'm like, wait a minute.
Yeah.
I was a Gentile.
Right.
I no longer am a Gentile. And we have, Christians today, and I was one, walking around calling myself a Gentile. Like, that's a normal thing. And
It's,
it's
it's an oxymoron.
Yeah, and that's an oxymoron.
You can't be a Christian Gentile.
Look up what a
That does
Gentile
not
is.
work.
But the Christian church today is trying to make Jews become Gentiles to accept their Jewish Messiah.
True.
And then we go and we try to check out on what we're being taught. And because we're just not certain. And we come to a study like this and find out, well, we were being told the wrong meaning and the wrong way of it being translated.
Right.
So it really gets to the point where you just got to be on your face with the Lord.
Sure.
Well, the word Gentile, actually it means nations. Even the Jews themselves, Israel was called a Gentile. It just means a nation. And sometimes, and the second use I understand is that if you're from one country, the guy from another country is a Gentile to you. He's a stranger. He's out. So a German can call an English person a Gentile, and he can also say you're a Gentile. So that's the real meaning of the word. But I think we misuse it, and the translators also are misusing
Like it means nations or groups.
Nations, yes, groups.
Of
But
people.
that's the first one. The second one is whoever is not within
Well, you
your
know
group
what?
is a
Right.
Gentile.
Like the
This
Baptist
ties right
Gentile,
in.
Pentecostal Gentile.
Yeah.
Yeah, this ties right in with what Angela was talking about a moment ago with common and holy.
Right.
Okay, which nation out of all of the nations in the world did God choose to make a covenant with?
Israel.
Hebrew.
Not the Jews, the
Israel.
Hebrews.
The Israel.
The Israelites, okay? Now, if you are other than that, you're goyim.
Right.
Yes.
You are not a part of this unique,
Group.
set
Set
apart
apart.
group of people that is special.
Does that make you common?
That makes you common. If you're not part of this group, you're not holy, you're common. You're one of the others. Now, I know that this kind of makes it us versus them type of mentality, but frankly, that's
no,
what it
but
is.
we join in. and
No.
not-
Right.
Because, yeah.
The thing is that the Jews at that time, we're looking at them like they never can come in.
They never
Right.
And that's not the fact. The fact
They
is,
need
don't
to
call
look at
them common or
Exodus.
clean because they can be.
Yes,
Right.
you can move from common.
Yes.
Well,
The
you have
whole-
so many examples
It was
of
taught
people
right
in
in
the
Exodus.
Torah that,
Strangers.
that became,
How
Yeah,
did
I
bring
mean,
the strangers
Caleb.
in?
Caleb
was
was
a Gentile, if you want
Right.
to call him that.
Messiah came from the loins of Ruth. You
He
know,
was a
That's
Gentile,
like-
Moabite.
All the way.
Yeah.
Right? There's so many foreigners in his genealogy.
Yeah. So that's a good thing to remember is we have a lot of preconceived
Yeah,
ideas
like
that we
Protestant
really
on the
need to
wall.
test
Mhm.
everything.
Mhm.
We've heard that
Yeah.
many times with lots of Christian pastors like to use test everything. Test
But they
by
don't.
Scripture. We need to really do that. We need to challenge our preconceived ideas. Sarah, carry on. Go with the next one.
I think I'll just skip to the last one because that one's real important to me. Leave the tares alone. No, really. Leave the tares alone. I know we see a weed and we want to pull it. We know for sure it's a weed and
Well,
we
wait a
want to
minute.
pull it.
Okay, so what is a weed?
Leave
You gotta
the
have
tares
you gotta have a definition
alone.
of weed.
Yeah.
There could be one with the
Actually,
smoke.
the tares are not
Wait,
called
one at a time,
weeds.
children.
I think you know why God says to leave the tares alone? Because they really look exactly like the real plant. And it's for God to know. We can't decide
I
that for
think
ourselves.
what he said was,
We can't
do
decide.
not pull up the weed. Why?
You're gonna pull
You
it
Pull
off.
will
out the
damage the
tear,
plant that
right.
is valuable.
Right.
So what do we take away from that?
He said
Well,
he
yeah.
has to do, he will do it himself, we can't do it,
We'll
that's what
separate.
Angela was saying.
Yeah, so we
It's his
can't
job,
pull
not
up
ours.
weeds because we might damage.
And we
Think about this. It's not just an identifying issue. Let's say we have a group like this and we have someone in it who is a tear.
Dun, dun,
And we
dun.
decide we're going to pull that tear. There will be others of you who are harmed in that process.
Yeah, that's true.
Even if we know that person is a seed of Satan, there still will be others here who are wheat, who are harmed by that pulling process. Leave it alone. He can take care of that.
They wouldn't understand.
That's his job.
But I think there's something about also, the pooling there is really different than, because Paul did say, if somebody does this, like excommunicate or don't have anything to do with them. I think the pooling there really is more of judging and you're going to hell. That we can't do. He has to make a judgment. But we do have to make a judgment that if a person does not repent, then we have to distance ourselves from him. That's what the Catholic calls excommunication. And Paul did even say that about that son who was
Well,
doing
you look at the
business
history
with
of the
mother.
church. What happened when they decided to pull the tears?
Splits the church.
A lot of holy people burned and got things chopped off and were
Now we have
tortured.
27,000 versions of Christianity. Yeah.
I mean,
If we
some of
just
them
leave
are
them
very
alone.
Them to hell, and they
We
say
don't do
better
that right.
Physically, you're destroyed than spiritually.
And I
But
think the thing is to remember here
it's
is
judgment.
that a tear looks a lot like wheat.
right.
So you, in your judgment, which is, I know that I do not
Human.
have terribly awesome judgment. I might mistake
Right.
a rough Christian who, you know what,
Or a late bloomer.
a late bloomer. I might consider somebody to be non-Christian when I'm not looking at their heart.
Yeah.
You know, I can't
Right.
see. I might see something that troubles me.
Well,
or
someone
offends
might
me.
even mistake you for one,
Someone probably has. Maybe.
given all of your bad habits.
Yeah.
Yes, that's true. Someone might mistake me for a tear and try to uproot me by my hair. But
Then you damage them from
But it does,
learning.
but there is a balance there.
yeah, I mean,
We're supposed
clearly
to, if
Paul
by their fruits you
teaches.
shall know them.
Yeah, clearly Paul teaches in
Yeah.
Corinthians 6 that do not even eat with a brother, a so-called Christian brother who is a. Now here's the thing you're looking at though: sexual immorality, drunkenness, all these list of pretty egregious violations of the Torah. Now, if somebody comes rolling up in here and they're clearly drunk, let's say, that someone is a Christian brother or sister who comes into our fellowship and they're drunk. Well, that's an obvious thing to challenge. I mean, it's like, dude, what's going on here? Are you inebriated?
Give them coffee.
That might be something to say, you know what, that's an obvious thing according to 1 Corinthians where you would say, brother, that's a little inappropriate.
Right.
You can offer correction. It's not, don't come back.
Yeah, right.
This isn't a good time.
What's that?
Wouldn't be a good time to have a discussion on a Friday night with someone who was
Yeah.
drunk. That might be a discussion for another time.
True. But I think leaving the tares alone is
Be
it's
gentle and
a
wise.
good, it's a good point to not be judging and letting
Right.
God sort them out. But if there's obvious, differences, that this person is obviously involved in gross immorality, well, there's no confusion.
Right.
This is very obviously a tear. That you can make a distinction based upon right judgment, not judging a person's heart and questionable issues about doctrine that are not related to the Torah or salvation, like what day does Passover fall on, or what are you going by a conjunction or a sliver, or these kind of things. You're not going to.
Or like, I'm not going to keep attending your Bible study if you let so and so be there because they are not doing this, this, and that.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
That there's no place.
because different people, where they're at, grow in different levels. Like one might have a problem in a certain area, but as he grows in Christ, eventually that falls off. You know what I'm saying? So we have to be sensitive in the spirit, very sensitive to the spirit
And
and the
could
heart.
that be what he means in a way about lest you uproot the wheat with them. Because what if I personally think, I'm of the opinion that tares can become wheat. Because it says an enemy did this. Well, what did that enemy do in the garden?
Yeah.
He gave a mixed seed to the woman. Was the woman a tare? No. I mean, you have to look at it that way. Like, we have the potential of being a tare or a wheat. Which seed is in us? Which seed are we watering? Which one are we feeding? Yeah. So, I mean, so I don't know. That's just something I
We're all
think.
born tares. I think that's a great observation.
As long as you're not a holy terror. In my dumb jokes.
Yeah, I think, your point there about, treating your mother and father lightly, that was a really big eye-opener for me in looking at this week. Was just looking at the language carefully about what that actually means. I don't know how many times I would have just said to my parents, oh, come on, yeah, whatever, just taking what your parents say lightly and just kind of, whether you're openly saying, talk to the hand, or if you are inwardly saying, talk to the hand, gosh, I don't know how many times I've done that. And what is the punishment for this?
The bad curse.
No.
This is death.
And this is the command that connects the two of the godly and the earthly, the 10 commands, because you can say, honor my father and mother as in heavenly father and heavenly mother, like I was saying.
Right.
Father Yahovah and mother Torah, or
Well, this
Jerusalem
is the
that gives the
commandment
water,
that comes
the
with
birthing and all that.
This is the commandment that comes with a promise of life. So what's the opposite? You dishonor mother and father, your life gets short.
Well, it also says that you may dwell in the land, and very shortly after that, they get.
Yeah.
They don't what?
Well, the temple gets burned down, and they're not really,
Right.
they're not dwelling freely in their land. Well,
Right.
less freely, I don't.
And I think that thing about moving boundary markers is huge. That's huge.
And also too, like
Comes
Messiah talks
stealing.
about how if I tell you earthly things and you don't believe, how can I tell you heavenly things? So if we take the honor your father and mother lightly here of earthly things, how can you possibly honor father and mother in heavenly?
Right.
Because you can't do it here.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, those are excellent takeaways from this section. And did anybody have any final comments about chapters 14 and 15 that you want to throw out in your readings this week? Did you find anything other that was curious or?
Maybe one thing about John the Baptist or John the Baptizer, I always had wrong. In the beginning, with Herod, he says also, is he the one that came back? Do they do that on purpose? Because it's more often mentioned that he's compared to the prophet from before. And that just struck me as kind of strange in the beginning.
Yeah.
Was it in the beginning of the chapter?
Yeah, he was
14,
saying
was
he
it
is
13?
Elijah.
Yeah, Elijah, but Elijah has gone, the whole thing, and now we see it again with someone like Herod, who is a non-believer, of course, but it just struck me as just placed in there randomly, quote unquote.
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know. What do you guys think?
Two things too. Here we talk about reincarnation or John the Baptist being in Jesus now. Well, somebody did comment among the early writers that Jesus and John looked almost the same. So number two, spirits. In Mark, it was mentioned, they thought it was a spirit. I mean, I was very surprised about this too, that reincarnation possession of a dead person in another body and not demons, but real person going into another body. So that kind of reincarnation. And they're talking about spirits, and not Jesus, but spirit, the dead. Was this very ripe among the Jews about people still, the spirit of people roaming around the earth?
And we had three making to life again, when people really died 3 times.
Yeah,
Weird.
I think we discussed that briefly before about Jewish beliefs regarding spirits and souls and such like that. And I think we talked about this when we talked about demons possessing all these people in the New Testament that you just don't see in Torah and the Tanakh. And I think I mentioned at that time that there was a pretty prevalent belief among the Jews that evil spirits were not what you would consider fallen angels or something, like the 1/3 of the angels that fell from the heavens and went to go with Satan, rallied around Satan, and that these are the creatures that are inhabiting people and walking around and frightening people and whatnot. The Jews don't actually believe that. They apparently believe that before man was created on the earth, something else was here. And that these evil spirits are the wandering souls of these creatures that are almost like a purely animalistic, it's just like the flesh. There was no spirit. It was a completely flesh creature that was just a bundle of appetites.
How did it survive? They're just
No. I mean, they used to be a living creature that were on this planet before man was created on the planet, before the creation.
And then what happened? How could they observe them if they were
They're
just
no
all
planet.
human, all
Where does
flesh?
this come
They
from?
should be out.
This is according to the Zohar.
There you
The
go.
Jewish traditions talk about that these demon creatures are not fallen angels. They are the disembodied spirits of some creature that was alive on this planet before God created man on it.
But they could have been in heaven and kicked them out, like you said.
I don't know. I'm just telling you what the Jews say. It's a really wacky thing. I've never heard that in my life. But there you go.
Oh, yeah.
I just something else to talk about in here that we've talked about before, but just kind of bring it up again because I think it's important. Is when he feeds the 5,000 and the 4,000 is the Messiah. Just like he never baptized, he never fed the people either. That's our job. So like those who are learned disciples of Messiah or of the Word through Messiah, it's our job to feed the sheep. Do you love me? Feed my sheep. So that's what our job is too. So that's just a picture of that. He didn't feed them, we feed them while we're here. We're doing the work. We're spreading the leaven of the kingdom until all is leavened.
Oh, by the way, I can't remember exactly the details, but as you said, this symbolism of 7, 12, 5. There was somebody who, I think it's 119 Ministries, who said that this is all symbolism and it's even prophetic. And it just struck me how Matthew was trying to gather all these stories about Jesus, was gathering it to point to the Jews that Jesus is the Messiah. And he picked, because John said he did all these kind of miracles and things that it would not contain in any book in human history. So Matthew was trying to pick all these miracles that had symbolism in them, and how omnipotent God is to be able to create this scenery, real, happening, and he had messages in each of them. So he picked up all these miracles of all miracles to show us, as you have threshed out lessons about the Jews and his prophecy. Amazing.
Yeah, and I don't think Matthew knew when he was writing it.
Yeah, but he was the guide.
But because he was guided by the Holy
Right.
Spirit, I think that's how you end up. And Matthew is known for its chiasms. It is a book composed of tiny chiasms, tiny menorahs, which make up, I think, I'm looking into this, there's one theory, the whole book is a menorah.
I love that you pointed that out because I always look in the Tanakh for chiasms, but I never considered looking at the Messiah's words. Hello,
Yeah.
and just like
I think
oh my gosh.
Matthew is known for just being rife with it.
And they're not
Little
real
tiny
obvious,
ones, big ones,
probably
huge
because
ones.
of translations. I'm thinking too, it makes it a little bit more difficult to pick up on them. Whereas the Tanakh, they're easier. They're still difficult, but they're easier to find.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you guys haven't, check out Rabbi David Foreman's teaching on the Torah. He loves chiasms, and some of the chiasms that he comes up with in the scriptures to show you is like, wow,
I didn't even know what a chiasm was.
It's
Well, there was a
really
chasm.
I know, I was working on it this week and Johnson keeps going by and he's all, chasm. I'm like,
Yes.
No, it's a really interesting, very, it's unique to Jewish literature, I mean, I taught literature for years, and I had never seen any chiastic structures like that in any other literary form that I'm aware of.
I learned a lot.
Yeah,
Super cool.
very cool.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, excellent.
Yeah.
Let us pray.
Thank you.